Welcome, everyone. Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Christ consciousness. What I want to cover was Anton LeVay, the head of the Church of Satan, during his operation of that organization, a pedophile? And if so, was Michael Aquino involved in similar activities there? Well, this is an interesting subject as I found out about his past relationship history. And certainly this is his marriage history, which you think in itself is kind of strange because you wouldn't think a Satanist would get married. Well, he technically wasn't married most of his life. But what is a pedophile? Well, a pedophile is someone who's attracted to prepubescent women, meaning from 13 or younger, even though most women go through puberty now at anywhere from 10 to 12, but the legal age right now is 13 and below. So that means you're attracted to non-adults who are children because you're not an adult until you reach puberty. Jews do this, I think it's 13, where you have your bar mitzvah. You are now an adult. And that means you act more like an adult. But of course, that's not true in society because you have to be 18 to have any legal rights in the society. Basically, until you're 18, you have to do what your parents say, and you're under their thumb. You don't really have any rights. You can't enter into contracts, etc., as a general rule. But what's confusing here is that there's the sexual age of consent, and that means you can consent to sexuality even though you're not a legal adult. You are a physical adult once you reach, basically, I guess it's 14. Now, around the world, the average sexual age of consent is anywhere from 14 to 16 in general. Most are 16. Some, like even the state of California and several other states in the United States, sexual consent is 18. Well, how weird is that? Other countries like Japan and Germany, it's 14. Well, isn't that kind of young? So the whole idea is that but fits those societies for their basic perversion of their sexuality that they're known for. The Japanese have nothing but images of schoolgirls everywhere. And what does a schoolgirl mean? Well, you could say they're 16-year-olds, high school girls who are past puberty, but there seems to be a real push of young girls. So, which is very typical Japanese. I mean, in Japan, you can buy a sex doll that is a child size, child looking, etc. So you can get a sex doll that looks like a child. So there's obviously that reality there, and the Japanese are into that because they're a very disturbed group of people and always have been. Brutal murderers, psychotics, them and their German friends. So the whole idea is that you have all these problems that you run into with these guys. But age of consent is very confusing. If you're an adult, are you able to have sex with depending on the legal age, let's take the common legal age around the world, which is probably 80% of the countries have, including most of the United States, is 16. So, but check that out, because California, one of the most populous state in the United States, it's 18, and there's several other states as well. And you can go online to Seweropedia, and you can find these statistics there. So around the world, they have these different things, and as I said, it does that. Some places you don't have an age of consent. Typically in Muslim countries, you have to be married, plain and simple. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can't have sex even if you're 50 without being married. So that's part of Shia law, I'm assuming. So it varies everywhere, and of course these things, what's enforced, what's not enforced is another issue. So we run into all these kind of things that are out there and need to look at it carefully. So that's what pedophilia is. It means you're attracted to prepubescent men and women, for that matter. There's a serious problem in this country of female teachers sexually molesting their students, and this happens very frequently. There were some famous cases of these because of the sexual reality. The Pamela Smart case, was it Letourneau? She fell in love with this 14-year-old guy, and here she's an adult of 30. I mean, this is pretty bizarre. But, teachers are pretty weird, and as I said, they are pretty much the bottom of the barrel, regardless of whether they're females or males. Teachers are really a special type of crud out there who really hurt society by their bad teaching methods and their personal perversions. So we have all these things going on. That this happens quite frequently. Now, what is the age of consent there? Now, are teachers being prosecuted? I've heard this before, and there even was a famous case of a 17-year-old who had sex with a movie star, some Italian actress, I forget her name now, which came out, and of course, because he was 17 and not 18, oh, big difference there, big difference. You county 360 days, oh yeah, big difference. Well, it's ridiculous there. Now, certainly that person was in the age of consent, but apparently age of consent doesn't really hold water anywhere. We had this problem in the UK with the prince who was stripped of everything because he had sex with a 17-year-old girl on a couple of occasions, supposedly hooked up to that pimp is what he was, Epstein. So the whole idea is that, what does all that mean again? Well, that was a complicated case because apparently she was coerced and forced, etc. But she was at the age of consent. I think that's two different issues. Seems to me they're pushing, well, she was underage, so this is a terrible crime. Well, you're not underage. She's in the age of consent. So what does that mean? I could not find a clear understanding of that. So if anybody out there understands what the age of consent means in a more legalized manner. So the point is, if you are an adult and have sex, and you could be in Japan or Germany with a 14-year-old, is that legal? Well, probably in those countries it is, because they look at sex in a lot different outside of the pilgrim United States. But that's not the point. The point is that legal for an adult, meaning a person over 18? So what does that mean? And of course, I have known people who were underage, who had sex with other underage people, and while the woman involved didn't press charges because it was her boyfriend, the parents had the state press charges, and the state put him in prison. This is not a joke. So I have this firsthand. This happens more than you think. And nobody has to press charges, like the bogus thing that happened at the Academy Awards when someone goes out and assaults somebody. You don't have to file a charge. Matter of fact, if the state is aware that a crime has been committed, it is their obligation to prosecute the person who just committed that crime. You don't need to have the victim come forward and do that. And there's reasons for that, because it gets the victim off the hook for revenge and other things to a large extent. Well, I didn't call the police. They stepped in because you made it so public. I hope everybody understands. These are little things that people don't understand, but very much part of your reality. So you don't have to have someone press charges against you. If it becomes a known fact and it is illegal, the state can step in and do it anyway, and it does it all the time. You got to remember, this world is very safe. It's very boring. And, if they want to keep their jobs, the judges, the lawyers, the police, well, they have to harass you, because they certainly aren't going to go after the guy with the guns or the guy who's paying them off. So when you add the guns and the guy that's paying you off, well, that's 98% of crime. So they got to get you because you were screaming in your backyard because you had too many beers after the football game. So they'll shoot you 20 times. So this is how it works, and you need to understand that. Now, the same thing comes with sexuality. So if there's a complaint against you, let's say a parent complains against you, maybe you're 20, 25, 30, and you're having sex with their 16-year-old daughter, the state can come in and prosecute you. The 16-year-old daughter, who's your girlfriend and probably doesn't want charges against you, at least not yet, the reality is that it doesn't matter. So these are not fun little things just to dismiss. Now, if somebody can clarify age of consent, it would be very interesting of what that means. And I can't spend hours researching these things. It's not that important to me, nor is it something that I particularly am seeking out there. So, but it is a reality, and sex is sex, and sex is a physical need. It has nothing to do with love or relationships or anything else. And people should be happily sexually fulfilled. And if they were, this world would be a lot peaceful, a lot less crime, a lot less corruption of people. But they're not. The entire population is not sexually fulfilled, period. So this is the reason why we have so many problems. Really gets back to a kind of cliche-ish but Freudian reality that happens to be very true, unfortunately. Because of this bizarre, above anything else, even survival compulsion, particularly for males to have sexual intercourse regardless of what happens. And to a certain degree, women have this for the desire to have babies. They'll have babies with anybody if it comes down to the point that they can't find somebody. So this is very, very typical that happens out there. So all of that is part and parcel of what's going on, and you need to understand that. So age of consent is very different. And commonly it's 16, sometimes it's 14, I think a few places it's 12, and commonly around the world it's 16, and a lot of places 18. 16 to 18 I guess would be the common around the world, and it changes per country. So now that's age of consent. Now what does that mean? Now, and as I define prepubescent or 13 years and younger, well, that is pedophilia. So let's define that so we understand that as we get into the subject of Anton LeVay. And, you know, I didn't know this about him. It's interesting that it's never brought up by his detractors in any way whatsoever, which I find strange. They don't talk about this, and I don't believe, and I'm going to read the books again. I read Michael Aquino's books, who spent 10 years in the Church of Satan as one of their high-ranking members and claims to be a good friend of LeVay, which I'm not sure that's true or not. Others have stated this isn't true. LeVay looked at him as a egg-headed guy who writes the newsletter type of guy, and they weren't really that close. Now, Aquino calls everybody his close friend. He loves that term, no matter who they are, and I don't know what that means. So what does that really mean? Certainly, you betrayed your close friend when he wanted to make money and didn't really do much to help him and didn't stay with the organization even to see how it would work. The minute you had an opportunity, Aquino, to dump on him and leave the church and start your own, you did. So I don't know if that's good friends or not. So I don't know what the relationship there was as well. But he documented the trip. But I don't remember him talking about this. I do remember him talking about the fact that even though in interviews he says he's one of the greatest guys he's ever met, another very typical Aquino contradiction. In his books, he's a filthy, dirty guy that abused his animals. And I don't know if I don't think he said he abused his wife or not. But we come down to the fact that there is allegations of this. Now, again, proving stuff is difficult and time-consuming, and nobody's going to pay for that. So we go by allegations, and we assume there's some proof to it to some degree, or it's factual to some degree. Now, how much? We don't know. But Anton LeVay married his first wife, and they had a child, I think, very quickly after the marriage, which means they were probably in a relationship before that at 15. So we have to say that we must have met her at 14, and they had their baby when they were 15. So the point is, human period is 9 months. Well, most likely we have to then drop him down to 14. Now that's as close to 13 as you can get. So the bottom line is that, but it is not 13. When did he meet her? What was then? And he spent 10 years with her, had his first child with her. So this shows what? Well, this guy's a grown man. This guy is an adult. So the point is that, I don't know, he was in his 30s when he met, I don't know the exact numbers here, and I'm not going to spend the time to pencil it out, but this guy's in his middle 20s to middle 30s, and he's involved with a 14-year-old. And this is, then they started, he was involved in all these things. And of course, he's a guy with a weird background, and we just don't know if anything is particularly correct about him. He's made up this very glamorous story of what he actually, his life was about, or at least character stories. Working for the circus, quitting school, being a piano player, even having sex with Marilyn Monroe. All of these things cannot be verified one way or another, really, even though I believe Marilyn's manager came out and stated that she didn't have any. I don't know how he would know anyway. She was an unknown stripper or whatever. How do they know? People want to come out and immediately say the opposite of what may have been truth. We just don't know. Marilyn was a very, very loose woman, and she used her body to get ahead, and she slept with just about everybody. And what the comment was is that after you did that with Marilyn, there wasn't much else left. And that's probably true, but did you really care? I don't think so. So the whole idea is that she passed herself around between everybody, and to a certain extent it makes sense because that's how you get ahead in life as well. So needless to say, if you do it cautiously and carefully, it certainly helps to open a lot of doors, and she did quite well for a person of mediocre talents, and as far as I'm concerned, mediocre looks. I never thought she was so great. A lot of people think they do, but whatever. So the whole idea is that she was very much into and understood that using her body was an effective way of getting what she wanted. That's why she did the Playboy, etc. She made money there. And, of course, that kicked her off because she got fame from it, or kicked off Playboy, and that added to one thing after another. But we also have to understand that that's what Anton LeVay certainly was out there. He claimed to be playing music, and that was his main interest in life, in strip clubs and other places. Well, this means you're going to have a lot of contact with females and of all ages and types, and we all know that if you have problems in your family, and it doesn't wait until you're 18. Usually in your teenage years you start to have problems, and there's a lot of runaways, people that want to get away from their family. So what do? You don't really have any skills, but you are female and have a body, so you're going to be hanging out at these places is what I'm saying. So, I mean, all these things are, we have to look into. So let's get to his second wife. Now, his second wife, what isn't his wife, he never married her. They stayed together for 25 years. She was the main altar in the satanic Church of Satan. She was the person that started that and did that and so forth. And when he married her, supposedly, not married her, they got together again. They were never married. So she claimed a partnership and was able to get his assets by doing that because the judge declared it as a partnership, and it's a confused area there of what actually happened. It really wasn't a corporation. It was a partnership, etc., etc. And also, but that's legal things. So you got to understand, he didn't marry her. He's with her for 25 years. And she really was the one who was the altar. Now, what was this altar? Now, the altar, which was a necessity in all of this, and even regular witchcraft. I mean, Gardner, the famous Wicca inventor, the British ex-custom agent, stated, and I saw it even from his own mouth, that all witchcraft has to be done naked. Now, I don't know where that came from except for the fact that he wanted that, and he wanted the thrill and the openness of that in his Wicca practices. I find it hard to believe that everybody was running around naked in Europe, where it's very, very cold a lot of times, if people would really be doing that. So I don't know how all that works, but certainly skyclad, as they call nakedness, certainly adds a whole dimension to these type of things. And of course, it gives an extra attraction to it all. So if you're going to be different, you don't want to wear your Sunday best to do witchcraft. So you do the opposite. So, but he stated that. And of course, a large part of Wicca was all the things that were cut out when there was a huge resurgence in Wicca in the late 80s and 90s. And what was cut out was all the sexual stuff, which is a big part of it. The priestess of the Wicca covens all were expected to do the grand rite. Now, the grand rite is where everybody in the coven had sex with the head mistress of the coven. So, and again, these things, while people may find this odd today, is a way of people, of course, being very personal, intimate with people that they expect to have serious relationships with, people that will help them, people that will work together and be blended magically. So it makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a lot to be said about groups having sexual contact between themselves where people intimately know each other and express energies in a particular way. So I think it's very positive, but like everything. But of course, this is adults, 18 and above, who consent to this, obviously. Consent, again, has not only to do with age, it has to do with, are you stoned? Are you got drugs? Are you mentally able to commit? Are you awake? So these are all the things that consent is a big area. If you're retarded, you can't consent. If you're drugged, you can't consent. If you're drunk. So these are all things as legal age and consent is important. So, but Gardner was never accused of any pedophilia, so none of that was ever in it, and nor has it been in the huge industry of nudism. Nudist camps have always had families there, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. And this means you're mixing adults with children. I wonder what goes on in those camps, and that's always been a way to get child pornography out there. Is people would buy magazines of nudist camps, but nudist camps were not just guys and girls. They were whole families. So I always found that weird as well. So I don't know what goes on there as well. I don't go to those camps. I don't know what they're about. There was a huge one near me in Palm Springs. And from what I understand, you could bring whole families there. I don't know what the world of that is, but nudism is quite, again, common in all over the world. But it doesn't necessarily mean sexuality, even though I don't know how you really separate the two in this society. So that's the way the reality of we have to look at those things. In ancient times, this whole thing of pedophilia and age and even sexual choice was very blurred. The two greatest warriors on the planet, which were the Spartans and the samurais, always had same-sex helpers. And these helpers not only helped with their weapons and doing everything else, they helped with their sexual releases, particularly in battlefield situations where you didn't keep women around. So it was quite common, but it wasn't looked at as this is your main mate. This was looked at as a release and a practical aspect. But it's a huge part of their society. And certainly these are people that are considered the most braggadocio, macho characters, the samurais and the Spartans, who were brought up from day one to murder. Part of that was to accept the fact that they should have little boys, and that's what they had, both of them. You're talking about little boys, prepubescent, that they use sexually and who clean their weapons and their other tools. So the whole idea is that this is a reality that we look at strangely today. It has been stated, and I don't know if I've verified it, but Alexander the Great, one of the greatest conquerors of all time, had sex with everyone. Transsexuals, males, and females. So it wasn't the same, and it depended on your situation. I mean, a lot of times women aren't available. So the point is that in society, which wants to say it isn't true, well, bisexuality becomes a common thing to just satisfy yourself at that period of time. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are gay. It really doesn't. It just means that you understand the physical reality of it. So this is part of the understanding of sexuality in general. I don't want to go into that too much, but you got to remember you have to look at the perspection of something based in the time frame. So what was happening in ancient Greece is quite different than is happening in modern Western world now. So we have to understand that. And it's the same thing with what is considered appropriate sexually or not. Now, the bottom line is we do have these age of consent, which is very confused. What does it mean? Well, the point is people are, if you have sex with somebody consensually who's 16 and you're 25 or 40 or 50, well, they have consented. That's the, to that, there shouldn't be a problem technically, but I'm not sure if that's the case or not. So, and there's always the bizarre situation. This happens all the time. We see it in the media constantly of people claiming they didn't consent to it. It isn't really a rape, but it is. So it's very difficult. You go to someone's apartment, you go to someone's hotel room, and then the next morning you don't get the ring, you don't get this, and they throw you out the door, and all of a sudden it was rape. And we've went through this many times. It's a very difficult situation to deal with. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the minute you go into someone's hotel room in their apartment, you're consenting. Don't go there. What is a hotel room? It's a room with a bed in it. So that's what it is. Apartments or houses, well, basically these are places you have sex in and sleep in. So it's difficult. And I understand both sides of this, but it's very hard if I was on a jury to convict anybody of that type of a rape. You know, we all understand what rape is if somebody grabs somebody, breaks into a house. But when there's date rape, well, what is date rape? You should try not to put yourself in that situation. Certainly not going to hotel rooms or people's houses. So these are all the things that people have to look at. But as we get back into this, so his first wife was 14, 15 that he had a baby with. And maybe he married her, and they were together for 10 years because of the fact that he got her pregnant, she had a baby. Maybe there was a shotgun wedding, or he was getting into hot water. Maybe there's a problem. That's one way, of course, of taking the heat off of you. So if you marry someone, it wasn't just passing. You didn't just get somebody pregnant. You didn't rape them. Well, this was just something that happened because we just fell in love as little ones. But the point is, they are a problem there. And that problem there is the fact that this is not classified because it was not prepubescent. It was not pedophilia. But what we're talking about here is that, and his second wife, apparently, as I said, they got together when she was 18. Well, how convenient that that was the exact time then. I believe, or I allege, they were together for much longer than that. And God knows when they first met. Was she 16? Was she 15? We know that he likes the young girls and actually had sex and even pregnant. He was so sloppily having sex with someone that he didn't even bother to make sure they wouldn't get pregnant. So the whole idea is that she, again, became pregnant as well. And again, it adds up to this age of 18. But again, they didn't meet at 18. That's when they got together. They must have met before that. And was that 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Who knows? So then we go to his final wife, a Blanche Barton. And per her birth and everything else, they got together when she was in her 23, I believe, 22 or 23. As I said, these dates aren't exactly right, but the numbers, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through that. It'll never ending. You know, these kind of things to be done properly require lots of time, and I certainly can't spend 2 or 3 weeks researching these details here. We have to get the bigger picture of it all. And the bigger picture, getting into the minutiae of it, is not that important, except for as long as the dates are correct here. So it has been stated online that his first wife was 15. So the whole idea is that we have to go by that as a particular understanding has been quoted in other places. There are books about him. There are several autobiographies, which I do intend to read. Haven't had time to do that yet, but if I do find contradictory or better information, I will update that in another lecture. So she was 23. But again, this is a guy who's in his 50s or 60s by now. And apparently he wasn't very well. He had a heart problem most of his life. So he died fairly young in his middle 60s. I'm not sure here again. But he didn't really get that old. So she was 23. So we have 15, 18, and 23. And these are all a guy who is at least 10 to 20 years older than his wife. So that is the reality. Now, there is a thing in life that most guys, if they could, would marry a younger woman. And I think this is positive as well, because I think that older men are much more compatible with younger women who tend to be more flexible and more sexual with their attitudes and everything else. So while men continue their sexuality to the day they die, most women, it gets lesser and lesser the older they get, as a general rule. I knew an nympho who's 70. No, we're talking about in general, and if you don't know those facts, you really are living in a bottle of booze, a bumhead. So the whole idea is that you are just kind of stupid. So the whole idea is that's the reality of life as a general rule. We can't go by individuals because individuals are just that, individuals. So here's a guy who liked younger women, and he's already made 2 serious relationships. And I don't know if 23 is old. I don't consider it, but certainly is past that age of 16 to 18, which is preferable, but most likely he's known these people way before their regular ages. We have to assume that. So we already have two that are, one that we know is underage, radically underage. 15 is young, especially if you probably met at 14. So you're really getting young here without being a pedophile. 18, again, we don't know. Most likely he knew her for at least a couple of years before that. So he's establishing what he likes. He's also establishing when he marries a 23-year-old that he likes young girls when he's in his late 50s and 60s. So this shows what he's looking for. And the kicker to it all is the fact that his daughter, Zena, by his second live-in girlfriend, Hegarty, got pregnant at 13. And apparently, and I'd have to look into this further, and again, I'd have to read his autobiography and things written about his comments on all that, shows that there is a problem there, but not really. I mean, she's in with a group of people who are having these kind of sexual orgies, apparently. Now, the altar there, which his second wife was pretty much the subject of, and even Lilith Aquino claims that she was an altar at times, which means the altars basically has been described, and even by Aquino himself, is that it was an eyes wide shut reality where people ran around with masks and they had sex with everybody. And apparently that's what this was supposed to be. The altar was supposedly a free sex type thing that anybody at that meeting could partake in. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't see Lilith Aquino doing that, even though she was the head of her own satanic coven, grotto as they called them, in New York City. And that's how Aquino himself, Michael, met her. So if she was ahead of her own, I mean, she started it, she brought men in, and of course part of this was to have this open sexuality, which is a big thing of what Satanism pushed, was open sexuality, appreciate your sexuality, and of course anytime you do that, you're going to gather a crowd. The problem with these crowds is they don't really open their wallets. They want to come in for as cheap as they can, take the fun, take the drugs, and leave. And they don't support you. And of course, Anton LeVay found this out when he really had no kind of income after selling a few books and getting a few movie roles that paid you very little to nothing, as Hollywood generally does, and having nothing there, needing now to make a living. And having a lot of problems that go with having a satanic organization is all about. So he learned that. But the point is that and I don't know what the actual goings on there. I don't think he was charging admission or other things. But if you have open meetings with that involve sexuality, you're going to get everybody and their brother to show up. So I don't know how they screened that, what went on there. I don't know. But apparently Aquino was there all the time partaking in this, or at least being part of it. Yet he claims he's a prude and this and that. And, of course, Lilith, his wife, claims that she was an altar a few times. Does that mean that everybody there was having intercourse with her, which is part of the Wiccan Great Rite? But it was for the coven and not for anybody who showed up at the Black House in San Francisco. And I'm sure that these meetings, or at least the sexual part, must have been not just open to the public. So I'm not sure how that went, but, of course, that's how you get a crowd. So there was at least lots of nudity and sexual thrills without necessarily the physical result of it. I don't know if anybody had a happy ending there except select few. I don't know. It'd be interesting to know that. Is that what went on there? But all the pictures and everything else that we see of these meetings all have that, and it was done deliberately. That's going to get attention. Nobody's going to turn away from that. And certainly it's something, well, gee, if I show up there, at least I'll get an eyeful and maybe more. The fact that his daughter was running around there at a very young age, and I don't know if she was part of these ceremonies or what, at least not part of the altar, but the bottom line is that certainly got pregnant at 13. Some people have claimed that he impregnated her. Now, there's no evidence to that fact whatsoever. We don't know who impregnated her or anything else, and we'll look into it. And apparently, she hasn't made statements on this, and it makes it even more strange. She stayed within the satanic community. She also rejected the Church of Satan and went to the Temple of Set, and then she rejected them. She's a typical person who isn't happy anywhere, but wanted a different reality and started her own. Well, I think that comes from Daddy, and she wanted to, of course, have her kind of own organization, which she did run. Now she's a Buddhist tantric. I don't know if her tantric teachings and having, you can talk to her on the phone. She's out of Berlin. You can pay for a psychic consultation, etc. Zena, and she was married to a guy named Shrek, and she still is living in Berlin, doing these kind of, and I don't know how much sex is involved in that or not. Seems to me that there is some elements of that there. Anytime you throw in tantra starts to mean sexual practices. So I don't know. We just don't know. But if you want to, you can call her up and have a little psychic reading and talk about whatever you want. So it's very, very interesting that's there. But she hasn't come out officially, as far as I know, saying who the father of her child was. Now, as I said, a lot of people say that Anton LeVay did it. Well, that's that her father impregnated her. Certainly, I'm not sure that would be against any satanic understandings. It may fit right in. But we don't know, and again, that's another allegation we have to be very careful of. But, we're putting up the fact that it's young girls. All the women he's been involved with have been very young. He certainly has been on the hunt for young girls, it appears, and I'm sure there are other ones there. But anybody who's had any kind of long relationship with has been young compared to him. At least he's always 10 to 20 years older than them. And we're getting into areas that are very close to actual young girls, age of consent women, not pedophilia. But it's getting close when you're 14, 15-year-old. Well, you're getting very close there. So it shows that's where his taste runs. So what I'm saying is his taste run to young girls, and to a certain extent, the younger, the better. So could there be something going on there? Could he be hooked up because of his tastes into these international pedophilia rings, which actually kidnap people, work with Central Intelligence and other agencies, and who seem to be all around the country and the world and in mass out there, and frequented by big money people who seem to have this as their personal perversion? Certainly the amount of places that have these services, including rape, what are called rape houses, where people from other countries are brought in because they either owe money or trying to get into the United States, and they're used as prostitutes. This is very real. The Russians do this. Everyone does this. And a lot of these people are at least underage. They are not 18. They're usually anywhere from 15 to 17 as one of the extra little bonuses or tastes that these rich people apparently will support these criminals with. And it's very pandemic around the world. Super big in Hollywood with the Russian mafia, and of course the rest of the world as well. We have a lot of this going on with Asia, where they're bringing in people from Asia, and they have these rape houses where they're full of these women that people pay to go in and have sex with them. Really horrific what's going on in this age. And it's pandemic, and everybody knows it's out there. And of course, the payoffs are horrendous around the world to allow something as dirty as this to go on. But this is the corruption problem we have that I've talked about a billion times and will continue to talk about. So it is really a problem here. The other thing is to look at is the fact of, well, if this is the attitude there, and if there's something going on behind there, that maybe this person's involved with it, maybe not. Again, if you're going to be a Satanist and be involved with criminal activities of this heinous nature, got to be kind of stupid, because the lens is on you. People are watching you. I mean, Anton LeVay, every night people would drive by his house and shoot at it from their cars, and of course, particularly in those days, there's no way of enforcing that. Who was it? You drive, it's a drive-by. So he had to have special protections on the front of his house, etc. So the point is, if you're going to be involved in that, and you're going to look like you do, and you're going to have your reputation, which is the same thing that Aquino had, why would you be involved in something that you could easily be caught at? So that's one of the problems. But he, of course, like everybody else, has been linked to things because of his reputation. But we have physical facts here. So this is the attitude of the Church of Satan's leader. And this must go into his church. And if there's young people there, he's going to look the other way, or he's going to look at them, maybe thinking that they are something he's into. Having a daughter get pregnant at 13, which basically is pedophilia. I guess she is pubescent because she can have a child. But the point is that, as I said, actual pubescent takes place at 10 to 11, I believe. But the whole idea is that somebody's having sex at that age, and who did she have it with, and she didn't clarify it, etc., etc. So was that, and it certainly could be resolved. It would be very interesting to know who the father of her child was. But nobody brings this up. Nobody says anything about this, and I find this, and that the fact that he married a girl, 15 officially at marriage, but basically was 14 when they met, if not younger. And so this is, again, something looked at as it's okay. He already did it. So his child's doing it. So if that's the attitude, and during the 60s, a lot of people don't put things in the proper context, that young children from 13 to 15 was a big, were hanging around everywhere getting sexually involved with people. This was something that happened in the 60s and early 70s. All throughout Hollywood and everything else, you'd find these very young girls there. And what were they there for? Well, in the 60s, it was considered okay. And I know that sounds very strange today, but that was going on a lot back then. So that was part of it, as long as everybody taking drugs. So everybody was taking drugs, everybody was smoking pot, everybody was having sex. And that includes not just your adults, but we're talking about people that are pretty much 13 and above. They're all involved. They're hanging out. Now, what was like Roman Polanski, who I'm not really fond of, but what was she doing hanging out at this adult producer's home? And I believe this incident didn't happen in his home. It happened in Jack Nicholson's home, I believe, if I'm correct. But it wasn't his home. So she was hanging out there, and this was very typical. She claims he gave her drugs. Well, everybody was taking drugs back then. He probably did. Most people, particularly, marijuana has always been used as an aphrodisiac, particularly by women. So the whole idea is everybody's taking drugs because they uninhibits them. And this is part of the whole process, and really the perverse process that has been set up as human sexuality. So the whole idea is that this is something that's basically a necessity for people to take so they're sexually open. So the whole idea is that's right. Now, that was not unusual, and it wasn't Roman Polanski hunting this person down. It was the fact that she was there, and God knows where else she was at and whom else. So it wasn't at his house. It was other men. So she was a 14-year-old that was hanging around Hollywood adults. And that's a recipe that is equal to lighting a fuse on a dynamite stick. So you've got young girls around, you got drugs. There's only one thing that's going to happen after that, people, that it ain't too, you don't have to think too hard about it of what's going to happen after that. So that was very common back then. So, and it's looked upon now and frowned upon because of so many things, and probably should. That is too young. But if we go to the age of consent, well, we move that up 2 years, which I'm not sure mentally means much, but certainly you have to draw a line somewhere, to 16. Now, is that legal? That's the age of consent, but not in California, which is 18. Now, that's a big difference now. But that means that all those young girls who are hanging around looking for whatever they get, breaks, jobs, money, being with celebrities, just being around all that stuff, which is very seductive, all that stuff happens all the time. So people don't understand that, and they want to look at what the norms of today are. Well, the norms of ancient Greece was the fact that you had a little boy when you were a warrior. So it would be equivalent today is that our basic military, and particularly our special forces, your Green Berets, your SEALs, well, they all would have a 10-year-old, 12-year-old boy around that would clean their weapons, carry their stuff, and they would use sexually, particularly in battlefields. That's the equivalent. Now, that is unheard of today. And I don't know how much of that really goes on, but it may actually go on more than you think, but particularly in these foreign countries. But this is not unusual. It is with our norms of today. And that's why we always have to look at what is it today? It's not what it meant back in ancient Rome or Greece. What does it mean today? And this is where people try and go to, well, the root word of that comes. No, the root word is meaningless past a very base level. So what is the equivalent today? So when we look at it today, we have to understand that. So that was the attitude within the Church of Satan at that time. I have no idea what they're doing today and haven't done any modern research on these organizations for some time. But that was Anton LeVay's Church of Satan, not the Church of Satan of today or what they feel or do anything else. And he didn't condone it either. But, your actions speak louder than your words. And, of course, the problem with all Satanism, there's always the read between the lines attitude. Yeah, we're decadent. We're high. We have morals. We're decadent. We just don't lie about it like everybody else does. We come out and say that, we like drugs and we like sex, while the other people have used drugs and have sex but say they don't like it. So all of that is what they like to rationalize. But the bottom line is that's what they were into. They were into that in terms of this young attitude. In the 60s, it was common. We see it with his own daughter. So it means that the attitude around there certainly was open to underage sex going on. I'm sure there was no, I'm not sure, but certainly I doubt there was much pedophilia going on, where 13 and under were being involved in it. But it doesn't mean that, when you start getting into things with the age of consent, and I don't know, I thought back then it was 16. I don't know if that age went up in California or not, but the bottom line is that's still not the age of consent. So we have a problem here. So what is the attitude that, yeah, that's the law, but we're Satanists, we have a higher law. And of course, that's what they all tell you. They all say that we have a higher law. Not corrupt society, our own personal corruption is really what it comes down to. So that means, that was the general attitude in the Church of Satan at that time, which Michael Aquino was involved with, including the fact that both of his wives, Michael Aquino's, were actually grotto leaders of the Church of Satan that he connected with. So these were women that were, I'm assuming, very sexually open and had to be their own altars, I'm assuming. So the whole idea is that's all part of what Satanism preached and what they laid out as their actual rituals. So that was what's floating around there. So when you start getting into that, does that go down to getting into the pedophilia areas that are so horrific, where it starts in? Now, Michael Aquino was accused of having sexual, I don't know if it was intercourse or some sorts of sex. There was even allegations that there may have been some anal penetration with a 2 or 3-year-old at the Presidio. Now, this is, of course, outrageous in general, and certainly a horrific thing to do. But the bottom line is there's a big difference between even a 13-year-old and you're talking about what I would consider almost a baby, a 3, 4, 5-year-old. These things are just hard to even comprehend. It's hard to believe that somehow is a sexual turn-on to people in my book. So it's just weird or should I say evil weird. So, but there's never been any proof of that. But what I'm trying to set up here, because we can't really find any direct, it doesn't matter how much you listen to somebody or read their side of the story, and they say how innocent they are, and then you read the other side of the story, which says how terrible they are. Both sides are wrong. Both sides come from a very prejudiced viewpoint. You can't expect someone to admit to a crime. Some do it because they've been caught and they're in prison. Yeah, I did it. It makes you sound better. Of course, if you ever want parole, you got to say you did it and that you're sorry, or you never ever get parole. So you really can't go by that. You can't go by their friends. Oh, he's the greatest guy I ever knew. And this is, of course, what was said about David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam murderer, who shot people in the head with a .44, and who said that this was, that he was guilty of it. So what's that mean? So the whole idea is that we have to understand these things, is that you're going to go by what they say. So the whole, you can't do that. You can't go by their critics and you can't go by their friends and so forth. So you have to find truth, and few people are looking for truth. People are looking for things that will verify what they believe already. I don't like that guy. He's a Satanist. So I'm going to find all the information I can that's negative. Well, here's all the information. Now we'll throw out all this that is positive. I'll only take the negative. Well, is that the true story? Well, so the point is he's never, ever been convicted of any kind. Neither of them, Anton LeVay nor Michael Aquino, has ever been convicted. And there was charges were brought in one case, from what I understand, with the Presidio there, which a guy who was seeking $3 million, equivalent to $30 million today, for what went on there. So there's a money motive there, and to get lots of money. So this is a serious problem when you have any kind of legal case. The money should be secondary. Yes, you were violated. Yes, something happened. Here's money to try and make up. We know we can't really make up for it, but here's some money for therapy to help your life, etc. What it becomes is the opposite. Yeah, I want money. Period. So then the truth, the quasi-bent, twisted truth to fit your money-making charges are then brought up there. So, and of course and it was brought by a reverend from the Presidio as well. So this guy was a religious guy going after the Satanists and everything that goes involved with that. So it stinks to high heaven. And as usual, nobody, the one charge you had against him was thrown out, as is all the charges in the Presidio. There were 50 or 60 charges against the other person there, who was, again, a Baptist minister, who was accused of all these molestations at the preschool there, or whatever it was. All his charges were thrown out. So never convicted of anything. And we got some serious problems. If these people are getting off, and they are guilty, well, this is a crime that has nothing to do with the perpetrators. It has to do with the people who are enforcing this, who refuse to do it and who refuse to take the steps. But there doesn't seem to be any kind of evidence. We have very little evidence against anyone. Now, there is pressure apparently from above, including a whole sector of intelligence agencies that Aquino was linked to, that are involved in this industry just like drugs. So if something comes up, they make sure that it is squelched and things don't happen. The problem is if one person is convicted, that opens up a can of worms to a whole bunch of other things. Well, if this guy was convicted of it, there must be a lot more. So we don't know. But certainly there hasn't been anything overly blatant there. There's a lot of interesting things that were reported in the Presidio case, which turned out to be quasi-right, only half right. There's talk about his living room being painted black. Well, it wasn't his room, but he had his bedroom painted black. So, this is a kinky guy. It claims he's so perfect and living in almost a delusion, it appears, if that is the case or not. But he seems to be psychopathic, a sociopathic attitude, saying what a prude he is, yet his bedroom is painted black and all sorts of things are going on there in a satanic reality. So we just don't know with all that stuff. But there's, again, the society, your judges, lawyers, law enforcement are not getting convictions on anybody. They let the Satanists in the McMartin case, which, as far as I'm concerned, seems to be proven 100% that these were molesting children. They got away scot-free after long trials. Nobody got convicted of anything. It goes on and on and on, even though there's all sorts of evidence, even though these so-called good cops came in and tried to help, but none of that evidence seems to do anything. I'm not sure, no matter what evidence that you present, if it's used in court, again, is a big doubt because the judge decides that. Secondly, whether it has an effect on the trial, just because it's evidence, it doesn't mean anything. It's not proof. Evidence is evidence. It's not necessarily proof. But the point is that it certainly points in a direction or so. So those are all the things that we're running into that we need to understand with this case here, is that this young, underage reality was part of what was going on at the Church of Satan. And this was something that was apparently encouraged. Now, I'm not alleging, I'm anything that Anton LeVay did in a legal fashion. I don't know any of that stuff, and I hate to condemn anybody. It's the same thing with Michael Aquino. I'm seeking the truth, but certainly the atmosphere in the Church of Satan while Anton LeVay was running it was the fact that young underage sex was something that was certainly not frowned upon. And we just don't know what age of consent falls into here, because that would make it non-illegal. And certainly he didn't in any way that I'm aware of propagate, it's not in his books, pedophilia, which means prepubescent thing. Now that's something that steps over all the lines. When you start getting into the line of what is consent or not, well, this is where things get very gray. And the point is, if things are going to be that gray, then it's going to be up to an individual court to decide that. Well, that gets to be dangerous as well. But certainly, he had tastes for the young. And there's no way in hell that we can say, pun intended, that we can say that that wasn't the case with Anton LeVay. Now, we have no idea ultimately what was going on with Michael Aquino, who calls himself a prude, who said he only had sex with his 2 wives and nobody else. I guess all those orgies he missed. And he himself has stated that these were eyed wide shut, where there were people wearing masks, animal masks, having intercourse, and nobody could be identified, which may be a way of the reason why his daughter can't be identified. Somehow she got involved, and maybe he thought it was okay for her to participate at the age of 13. I don't know. The problem is that it's so stupid if people aren't taking some sort of birth control, because that's the problem with, this would be pre-AIDS, but, sexual diseases have been around forever. Venereal diseases are quite common. They're pandemic right now. This was pre-AIDS, but the bottom line is that pregnancy is always the biggest problem, because this is not something you wash away. You've got a entity there that is your responsibility for at least 18 years. This is not something to trifle with. You've created an entire person, and you have responsibility. And one of the things you have to be very careful of is that if you create some life, you've got to take care of it. And it's not just 18. It should be till the day that person dies or you die. That's the kind of responsibility you should look at of having children. But of course, the great moralistic Church of Satan wasn't concentrating too much on that. And I don't know what was going on there to prevent that. This was the 60s. I'm not sure when the birth control pill came out, but it was around then. Of course, this allowed women to have partners without much care because they couldn't get pregnant. Before that, it's always a problem, and condoms have always been very unreliable. They easily break, they slip off. There's all sorts of problems with condoms, which do not really give you a 100% birth control factor. There's a huge problem with them, and you have to be very careful. And, sex is not exactly something that you're doing very mindful all the time. So it's very easy for things to come off and break and everything else. This is all part of the reality of these things, that using condoms is a real problem. So I don't know if there's any birth control, but generally a 13-year-old, I don't know, can get birth control or not. I'm not sure if that's true back then, but who knows? But it wasn't taken into any consideration whatsoever. So with all that stated, it's very interesting to look at the bigger picture. So could there be something going on here? Is this an attitude of this particular organization? Well, the point is, it is. Could have something happened? Well, it certainly could have. It's all speculation. We don't know, but we do know that Anton LeVay had short eyes and liked young women, and probably the younger the better. Now, what that means, I don't know. I doubt if he was trying to get very young people, as we consider what pedophilia is. I doubt if he was looking at 10 or 12-year-olds, but we just don't know. It's unlikely that. But certainly there is a certain allure to young women from 14 to 18 in that area, which gets to be a very gray and dangerous area in life in general. Hopefully that makes things a wee bit clearer. Until next time.